Hi, welcome to Susan Stanley Stitch in Time. I'm so pleased to have you join me today. On this channel, I like to talk about cross stitch, quilting, textiles, and sewing notions from the past. I also like to share with you the projects that I'm working on and my progress. And today on this episode, we're going to take a look at some questions and comments because I've had a couple. We're going to discuss my projects, and then in light of the new year, I'd like to share with you where I started in my stitching journey with needle and thread, where I've been, and where I'm planning to go. And so the title of this episode is called A Thread Runs Through It. I also have some very special haul to share with you that I know you're going to want to stick around to see. So last episode, I was sharing with you about a quilt that I've been reinterpreting, reproducing for quite some time called the Civil War Bride. And I showed you this block, and as many of you know, this block was quite a challenge for me. And I had somebody write and ask me about this leaf that's hanging over the edge. So I stitched this using back basting and needle turn techniques. I also use a special technique for making the stems, which I shared on an earlier episode, but I'd be happy to share again. Anyway, so this was appliqued down a 1/4 inch away from the seam, from the edge, which is the seam allowance. Because in the original quilt, there were several motif elements that overlapped from one block to the other. And this happened to be one of the blocks where that was going on. So this will get sewn to the next block. I'll have to pull this back with a pin, sew it together, and then this tip of the leaf will get re-appliqued onto the adjacent block. So I hope that answers your question. I'm glad somebody noticed that. And then the next comment I thought was so fun, and it wasn't just from one person. I had several people say to me, why in the world do you say that, basically, why in the world do you say that red is your favorite color when you're surrounded by blue, you're stitching your Simple Harmonies box in blue, there's, you're wearing blue, your eyes are blue. I thought, yeah, I bet that's kind of a question you'd have. I can see why you had that question. So actually, my view and my feelings for color are, I love all colors. I really do. I love the way they interact and play with each other. That's kind of been my passion to explore that interaction for years. Red seems to be a color that makes my heart skip a beat. I would say that my trifecta of favorite colors are red, blue, and green. I just love that threesome, that combination. I had done an earlier episode, I think it was December, it was my 12th episode actually, my 12th video, and I talked about red and green. I talked about some of the history of red and green and some of the traditions surrounding red and green. I showed you some of my red and green projects. Red and green probably is my favorite combination, but then you throw a little blue in there and that makes things sparkle. Now, I also like red and orange. I like how red and purple play together. I like how red and brown work. I like red and black. So kind of for me, the sun in this solar system of colors is red. But like I said, I am not opposed to using any color, and especially because of how they play off of each other. So thank you for writing in and asking about that. And you will see a lot more blue because my family loves blue, and I love blue too. But that was fun. So what have I been up to this last month? Well, this last month happened to be Black Sampler November, and the chart that I was working on for that was Anne Grimshaw, 1818. Now that is one of my favorite time periods, 1818. I love the fabrics during that time period as well. This Quaker sampler is just classic to me, and the Scarlet Letter did a lovely job charting it. I love the motifs in Quaker samplers. There's something very pleasing. They're very balanced, they're peaceful, and I also love the font. And on this particular chart, I really like the strong graphic nature of the black against this lighter linen. So I'm using Russian tea cake, 37 count, and a Vera Soie d'Alger Noir. And this is my progress. This sampler really deserves to be a focus piece and have nothing interrupt it, but so far I'm just working on it in November, and at some point we will get bumped up on the list, but it's just so pleasant to stitch, and I love the floss. Love the contrast. Love the contrast. That's been really fun, really peaceful. My next project this last month was Mary Snow. Little Mary is such a precious, precious sampler, and I know many people have finished her. I'm hoping to finish her by the end of the year. That's kind of my goal, but we'll see. She is being stitched on 40 count vintage light exemplar, which is, I believe, a Lakeside linen. And I'm using a combination of NPI and a Vera Soie. I love so many things about this chart. Of course, I love the people, and I love the colors. And what I find really interesting is the color of this parrot. That teal and that gray, kind of brownish gray combo. Ooh, yummy. But I find that kind of surprising with these strong red and greens, these really bright red and greens. So that just pulls me in. I think the color of the floss actually, doesn't that motivate you to keep stitching? This border is what I mainly did this last month, because I didn't work on this very many days. It's a nice rhythmic border. It's easy to memorize the pattern and just keep repeating it. So I'll definitely finish that, and I'd love to fill in these motifs. But this has just been a pleasant. Hands Across the Sea charts are just so beautifully written and easy to follow. So that's been fun. I love Little Mary Snow. And then many of you know I have been stitching the Simple Harmonies box, which was designed by Katie Strachan. Now, Katie took the Forget Me Not chart from Jacob Modern Folk Embroidery, and she adapted it to fit onto a box. And if you aren't following her or you haven't checked out her finish on this, you need to pop on over to Katie Strachan Embroidery on Instagram, on FlossTube, and she also has a website. So this is what I have so far. This is the Simple Harmonies box. And for this project, I am using 37 count Cloudburst. Now this project is size specific. It has to finish on all panels to be affixed to a box. So I'm doing exactly what the designer suggested and using the linen that she suggested. She also recommends Gobelins. This is my first attempt with Gobelins. I'm using a number 10 beading needle and really enjoying it. Really enjoying that. This will also be my first time using Soie Surfine and Accentuate. I have used Soie Surfine on its own, but I believe that you marry these threads together to stitch. So that will be a new experience for me. Now, Katie's box was done on Russian tea cake with a very bright cherry red. It's just gorgeous. I chose this color palette, even though red it really is my favorite color. I chose this color palette because I want this to be a family heirloom, and the people in my family who will eventually acquire this, they all love blue. They all gravitate towards blue. So this is just peaceful, again, just peaceful stitching, a lot of pattern and rhythm to stitching these Quaker motifs, and it's just been really pleasant. Katie's tutorials are excellent. Again, she will walk you through the project if you decide to try it. So this is definitely new experience for me, and another part of that new experience has been using a hoop. Now, I'm not typically drawn to using a hoop, but Katie recommended keeping this linen stable on all sides so that it doesn't change the size or shape in any way, so that it will fit perfectly on the top of your wood. She designed this, I'm trusting her on that. I wrapped the hoop with twill tape, which makes it hug the linen in a really gently. And I have to say, I was really surprised. This just gently rests in your palm of your hand, and it actually puts less stress on your knuckles. There's no holding tight, which I was doing with stitching in hand, and there's no heavy scroll frames. Now, I know you can also affix those to a clamp, but my new experience with this has been really positive, and I will plan to move forward with it, using it in that way. So that's my Simple Harmonies. And then, of course, I'm planning to start and finish this, because apparently you can finish this in a few days. I'm sure some people can finish it in one day, but Theodora, another Katie Strachan project, she's coming out with a lot of great things. Beautiful, beautiful angel that finishes and looks like this. And you may see some of the finishes popping up on Instagram. If I get this done before I upload the video, I will definitely add that. The materials are just gorgeous. They're not materials that you could source anywhere. I mean, she obviously knows where to get these gorgeous quality sequins. Again, Samora Versoix. Just everything about it is beautiful and quality, and everything is labeled so well. The direction book, I mean, really, it's step by step taking you through every little bit of what needs to be done. So I feel really confident that I'll be able to finish that successfully. Beautiful, beautiful project. And then, of course, I'm always reading a book, and I am a member of the Sampler Guild of the Rockies, and they have a book club. This was the book that was on the book list for last month. I did miss the chat meeting because I was getting home late and I missed it, but if you are interested and like to read and like to chat with other stitchers, I would suggest hopping over to the Sampler Guild of the Rockies and joining. Then you can be a part of the book club. This book is fun. I don't want to give too much away about it, but if a sewing machine could talk and tell the stories of all the owners, then it might be written down in a book like this. It's 2 families, 3 secrets, and millions of stitches. And it's just kind of the story of the life of people who have owned this machine. And that's all I'll say. But it's a fun read. Nice, not heavy for when you just kind of want to break from the world. The last thing that I worked on, and this is in this fun train case. This case was made for me by a friend out of an old bank money bag. It feels like, it's kind of like feed sack fabric, but it's actually a money bag. So this project is my elongated hexagon that I'm hand piecing. Now you can see in the bottom of the bag, I have a bunch of pre-cut fabrics ready to go. And on the back of each of them, I have the stitching line marked. This was actually marked with a stamp, which is a new way of preparing hand stitching fabrics. But you can see the color palette that I'm working in, and I've got several in each colorway, because as the rounds get bigger, the need for more colors becomes greater. Well, this is what I have done so far. I'm still working on that little center. That little center is kind of like my sampler. I'm thinking of putting a house and maybe a fir tree. This is a Stellar J. I live in Washington, Seattle area. What I love about this more than anything, of course, the fabrics, but I love this era of fabrics. So this would be early. This is almost the same time period as Anne Grimshaw. And I love chintz. I love all the movement. And so I'll keep working on this. My most recent round is this light. And they're pieced by hand. On hand piecing, you don't typically press it until it's done, and the seams will go where they go, but there are ways of handling bulk by fanning out intersections. Also on hand piecing, you don't stitch in some places. So this has been fun. I would love to spend more time on it. I actually have to stamp, if you can believe it. I do need to stamp more fabrics. So I'm going to be busy with that for quite some time. My stitching journey began very early in my life. I grew up in a super creative home. My mother was a master chef. She embroidered, she made clothing, she made pretty much everything. She stitched, she beaded. There was a lot of beautiful creativity going on around me. And my father was a history buff and a prolific reader, and I was surrounded by antiques. I embroidered growing up. I sewed clothes. I made dolls. I dabbled in all sorts of crafts, but mostly textiles. That's just what I was drawn to. At age 18, when I began college, I was starving for creativity. I wasn't majoring in something very creative at all, and I just felt like I needed an outlet. So I decided I would take a quilting, I would learn how to quilt. And I went down to the local quilt shop / fabric shop and bought a quilting book and proceeded to walk myself through the steps of how to make a quilt. Now, at that time, when you got a quilt magazine or book, you had a picture of a block and you had the outline of the templates. And that was pretty much it. There really weren't directions on how to put the block together. You needed to know a lot about the grain of fabric, the bias. There were a lot of things that they assumed that you had knowledge of. Unfortunately, I'd grown up and I did have some of that knowledge. I learned to draft templates with a compass, and there were no Ulfamats or rotary cutters at that time. It was just needle, thread, scissors, nice pair of dressmaking shears, and a sewing machine. It's a lot different now. It's really changed. But here's an example of, I saved one of my early templates. I'm so glad I did. You can see this was the drawn line for cutting. This little hole was for taking a pencil and making a dot, 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 and then you would draw a really soft stitching line. This could either be hand pieced or pieced by machine. Now this was going to be a series of diamond shapes put together, so this template was made. You can see I use masking tape. It's pretty rough, but it worked. It really worked. So after that, I wanted to learn, I wanted to know everything about quilting. Well, this was the first quilt that I put together, the Lone Star, and it was from a book by Blanche and Helen Young. And this was actually the template for this quilt that's behind me. I'm going to insert a photo here of this quilt in entirety. You can't see the whole thing from there. But this is the quilt I made at age 19. What drew me to this quilt? I don't know. I loved the motif of a star. I loved the 8-pointed star that this quilt has in it. I loved the progression and the burst from the middle out. I wanted something that looked like the antiques I saw in books, but there just were not fabrics available. The only thing you could find at that time were little tiny dots and calico prints and solids. No one had really started reproducing fabrics from antique quilts. So this light colored muslin, that was easy to find, and I just built the quilt as best I could around images that I had of what felt like an antique quilt. I adapted and made do. When my first child was born, I stitched a sampler, and I stitched some other things, but the bunny and geese motifs just weren't speaking to me. I wanted something more, and I did not have access or did not know of samplers that had been reproduced, antique samplers that had been reproduced. So my passion for fabric and creating really never went away. And I took every quilt class that I could find, like I said. And I finished some, and some of them were just purely for the experience. And that's something that I found really invaluable. I find the process and the learning almost more important than the finished product. And believe me, I have a ton of finished product. But I do have several things that I've either gifted to somebody to finish or given to a charity to finish, or to a new quilter who wants to try their hand at it. It was all about the process to me, and I was always seeking to capture the look of these antique quilts that I loved and that I saw in books. At that time, I was living in San Diego, and I attended every class and lecture I could get my hands on. I learned about quilts through the centuries. I read books, and I just made quilts like crazy. And then I moved to Arizona, and at that time in Arizona there were several quilt shops, and I had the fortune of working at two of them. One of them was Bella Quilt Works, which is now closed, and the other one was Cactus Quilt Shop. And it's still there. It has a new owner, but the shop is still there. I made some dear friends working there, and learned so much. The shop owner at that time that I was working there also had a passion for antique quilts, and she loved to reinterpret them, and did everything she could to bring fabrics into the store that were reproduced from old quilts as much as possible. I also became a part of a quilt documentation team. Now, a quilt documentation team at that time would put an ad in the newspaper. Well, first of all, we would be trained. We would be trained in knowing everything about a quilt, pretty much the same content as an appraiser, except we would not put any monetary value on the quilt. We simply were documenting everything about the quilt. So we would put calls out into the community for people to come have their quilts and the memorabilia and the stories surrounding those quilts documented. Now, this program is still in effect, and it was begun through Michigan State University. It is an online web source. It began in 2003. It's an open access digital repository of thousands of images of quilts. If you ever want to spend some time looking at quilts, go get lost on that website. It's amazing. The information you will find includes images and stories of the quilts themselves, memorabilia that came along with the quilts. I have so many stories I could tell you about people who brought their quilts in. It probably could fill a book. These were from private and public collections, and they represent hundreds of hours of volunteers charting and writing out every detail about that quilt. So it could be put into a digital repository for people who want to do research, or for people who just want to, hey, I want to make a Lone Star quilt. Let me see what's been done. Let me have a look. And then you can go in and research. So it's really a wonderful thing. Now I think they have recently opened it up so that you can actually upload your own quilt and put down as much information as possible. If you are in an area that has a documentation team, and you could find this out through your local quilt shops, I highly recommend getting those family heirlooms documented. You you have treasures that you want to be out there for people to learn from and to be preserved. I will link below the website. It's quiltindex.org, but I will link that information below if you're interested. You can always ask me if you have questions. So that was a huge part of my life. We spent many hours and days, and we traveled to small communities in Arizona, and some real amazing treasures came out of people's attics and under their beds. And I'm really thankful I got to be a part of that. I had the opportunity to learn from some wonderful quilt teachers, Mary Lou McDonald, Marcia McCloskey, Betsy Chutchin. I have now am committed to attempt to make quilts and interpretations of antiques. I can't make a true reproduction because all the fabrics are not reproduced. Every fabric from antique quilts that's been available in the past has not been reproduced. And if it has been reproduced, it's probably been colorized for the modern palette. So you do the best you can, and you get as close as you can. On occasion, fabric lines are really close, and then you just buy them up like crazy. Same thing with samplers, right? We get the chart, we get the linen, we get the floss, but we are actually reinterpreting that sampler. It may have been charted to the T with mistakes and all, but we bring a little bit of ourselves into it. We pick the linen count that we like. We might change the green a little bit if it's not playing well with the colors. So it's a very similar concept. During this time, I learned so much about fabric and color and dye. I learned about quilt patterns, quilt blocks. I learned about hand quilting, machine quilting, piecing, applique, you name it. And I spent hours upon hours at home and as an employee of a quilt shop, helping people build a quilt from the ground up. And what do I mean by that? There were no kits at that time. If you wanted to interpret a quilt, if you wanted to create a quilt, you had to go do it on your own. You had to go into the store and buy every element, every fabric of that quilt and pick it out yourself and play with it next to the other fabrics and see how they worked together and test them out, audition them to see if they gave you the effect that you wanted. I did that for customers and I did it for myself. And I did it for myself sometimes just for the experience, and then everything was put back. And sometimes, and many times, I did that with fabrics and made a quilt. But it was all about the process and learning. And today, it's so different because today you can buy kits, you can buy charm squares, you can buy jelly rolls, you can buy everything all packaged up for you. It wasn't like that. It started slowly to become the way it is today when shops were offering block of the months and you could go in and buy for like $5 you could buy a block that was already pre-planned for you. They told you what fabric went where. And then of course now we see today it's a huge marketed product. The same thing with cross stitch. You can pull all the linen and the floss. You can create your color palette from the ground up, or you can go with everything that's recommended on the chart. So when I go to a fabric store and buy fabric, I'm looking for things that represent the quilts that I love, the antique quilts that I love, things that have been either reproduced to look a lot like the original antique or close, so I'm trying to get that same interpretation. After I buy fabric, I wash it and I press it and I put it on my shelf in my fabric room, my sewing room. It's my crayon box. It's beautiful. I love looking at it. It makes me happy even just seeing the fabric unused on the shelves. It's been 40 years plus of collecting, and nobody starts out with that amount of fabric. I don't organize it by grouping or collection. It's all organized by color, because I deal with the color. That's kind of the starting point for me. So I just pulled a stack off of my shelf for you to see. A stack of some of my reds. And there are so many ways to organize your fabric, but what works best for me is to keep the largest piece on the outside. Well, first of all, I like to have all of this showing out front so I can find the fabric. Now, if the piece is too small to be folded and actually show in a stack, it goes in a scrap basket. And I have a big scrap basket, but I usually have my larger cuts on the outside, smaller cuts on the inside, and then little pieces that actually can be used. Sometimes I open this up and I've got a stack of 2-inch squares already cut. That's great. If that's what I'm looking for, it's already done. So that's how I organize my collection of fabric. Now that I've begun my cross stitch journey and just been really embracing this wholeheartedly, I'm trying to reinterpret antique samplers, and I'm attempting to do the same thing with my floss and my linen. I'm really like a newbie in many ways, starting my journey just like I did with quilting, embracing the wonder of the hoops, the linen, the floss, the needles, the scissors, everything about it, the charts. Of course, I've loved the charts as soon as I discovered them. So I'm glad you're joining me on this journey. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about some of the quilts from my past. And I have talked to you a little bit already about this Lone Star. I do want to show you a picture of the label on the back. So you can see that label contains quite a story, and it also has one of the documentation labels that was documented in the state of Arizona and is on the Quilt Index. And part of my motivation is that family members in the future will see those labels and realize what meaning, if they don't realize already, what meaning making these things meant to me, how much it meant to me to make them. Maybe they won't end up in the Goodwill that way. I don't know. Maybe they will, but at least they'll know what was going on in my life and why I stitched all of these all these quilts, and of course, hopefully, a bunch of samplers too. I am pretty committed and passionate about documenting my work, and I would encourage you to do the same thing. And I want to talk about exploring ways to do that in the future, because I feel like it's so important. We see so many antique textiles and we don't know anything about them. We don't know their maker a lot of times because they didn't write their full name or their date that they completed it or started it or any information. So if you can attach the who, what, where, when, and the why to your item, oh boy, it just makes it so much more rich and special for those who are going to inherit it someday or discover it, somewhere. So I want to show you a few of the quilts that I that I've made. Of course, I did, we've talked about the Lone Star. This is the book by Blanche and Henlon Young that I used. This book was printed in 1979, and it was $6.50. And this is how I taught myself to quilt. That was the first of my adventures. So the next quilt I'm going to show you, I'm going to put the picture in here. This next quilt is called Gone to Texas, and it was a quilt that I made when I found out we were moving from Arizona to Texas, and it's from this book. It's a Betsy Chutchin book, and just a fantastic book. This is a picture of the antique. And this quilt means a lot to me because as I was packing, I had a whole summer to pack, and I knew we were leaving. We were sending our younger son off to college, and we were moving all at the same time. As I was pulling my fabric out from under my bed, because I didn't have a sewing room at that time, and I didn't have shelves to put it out on. It all was stored in bins in various places in the house by color. I started cutting out the elements to this quilt, and as you can see, as you saw from the picture, it's got a lot of parts and pieces, a lot of moving parts. So it was kind of a moving on and a closure quilt that I put together. There's always happy, sad moments when you move, and so I'm going to show you some of the fabrics up close because really are some of my favorites. I love brown. I love the way things play with brown. I love the madder, this madder color, and I love these peachy, pinky matters, and then I love throwing in a little blue. And as you saw from my quilt, when you saw the full view, if you noticed, it is laid out a little bit differently than the original antique. I did my own interpretation of it. It's probably one of the biggest quilts I've made. Actually, no, I think some of these are big, but anyway, they tell my story. So, of course, I have a label on the back that tells why I made this quilt, where we were moving to, and where we're moving from, what the year was. And it's a great scrapbook of my experience. I've been reviewing all these kits and quilts and cross stitch and samplers projects that I have because I think we kind of do that at the end of the year, and we reevaluate and we make plans. And I make plans, I write in pencil and have a big eraser because I don't want to lock myself in if there's some other direction that my heart wants to take me, or something that happens and I want to go in a different direction. So I want to share with you what I'm hoping to do next and a little bit about what 2023 is going to look like for me. So samplers, what am I thinking about for this next year? I have a couple things on my radar, and in my quilt life, I have kitted my own projects with my own fabric. And so I'm kind of wanting to explore that with samplers. And one sampler that has just been eating away at me is Hannah Lancaster. I think it's the girl in the dress that draws me in, and I believe that's a girl in a dress. I know there is some discussion as to whatever the person is holding, because some children in dresses were boys, depending on the item in their hands. That's how you determine. So, and I thank those people who pointed that out to me. That just draws me in right away. And then, of course, this house. And I've wanted to stitch this for quite some time. Hannah Lancaster sampler. She's 1838, I believe. and she's English. She's from the Worcester Art Museum in Massachusetts. And so if I was going to start something, this one is definitely going to be on that list of possibilities. I am debating on the linen. I'm considering auditioning Russian tea cake and Fuller's Teasel. And I have those on order. They have not arrived yet. And I want to do a little bit of experimentation with floss on those linens. I want to try Soie d'Alger and 103. Just a few stitches in the border just to see how it looks. I want to kind of create my own parameters for what I like, and I will definitely report that back to you and let you know what I discover. I do like the border. It's interesting. I am not in love with stitching borders, but this one has enough interest in different motif going on that I think it will be fun. And the birds, of course, I always love the birds, and there's several birds. I mean, they're kind of birds everywhere. Love this basket. Looks a bit like a strawberry basket. And then it looks like she's holding a little basket too, so just really sweet. So this is definitely on my radar for possible start next year. I used to just buy whatever was suggested, but now I'm really trying to experiment, just like I have done in my quilt world, and play around with options. Now this next one, I really love this chart. When I saw this, I just went nuts. These look like tomatoes to me. I don't know, they might be buds. I think that's what draws me in, is this red flower activity. And then of course I love these animals kind of embedded in the grass, and the girl. The house is interesting. It's huge. It almost looks like an institutional building. I don't know. I have to read a little bit more about it. This is a needlework press. So there is the option to, and this is the original. I don't know if that. There is an option in the back to do a partial chart, and I don't know if that's something I'd like to do. I'll just flash that right there. You can just do a section of it. But I did order the threads from the attic, and oh my goodness, they're so pretty. Really, really pretty. The red, this red is probably the one that draws me in, but I love this kind of brick red too, and the way they would play together. And then of course there's that blue and green, so you know me, those are my colors. So that's a consideration. Mary Carr 1840. I also downloaded Mary Brutnell 1839 from Hedgerow Stitching. I do love a simple marking sampler, and I think what I want to do with this one is play around with a linen that is a count that I don't normally stitch in, which would be 30 count. I'm considering using Mariner's Map for this, and I want to also, on this one, if I decide to go with it, I want to play with Gobelins or Soie d'Alger and just do a little experimenting on the side to see how I like the feel of that thread and the linen, and how I like the coverage. I'm going to be a little more deliberate in my choices for sure. And then Mary Heath is also another option. She is from Hedgerow Stitching. Another simple marking sampler with some, I believe, eyelet or queen stitches in there. I like the colors on this one. They're very soft, and I think I like those bold letters with those queen stitches. I think that draws me in too. Of course, I love the checkerboard. love the checkerboard and this outer border of blue. So, no. Mary Bretnall, she's colorful, she's charming, she's happy. She will definitely keep your interest because of all the different colors. Both very close in time period. Then for continuing my samplers, we've already talked about Mary Snow. I will be continuing her next year, keeping that going. If I don't finish her by December, I will be continuing my Simple Harmonies. That will definitely not be finished by December, but you know, who knows? Maybe a year from now I'll have a box. Who knows? And then my Dutch Beauty. I have not shown that for quite some time, have not worked on it in a little bit, but just a 1790, just a really amazing long-term project, which I seem to really gravitate to. Here are the flosses. This floss collection is really a mixture of a lot of different product. But you know, again, I'm an experimenter, so I'm having fun trying different flosses on this 45 count Cream and Sugar by Fiber on a Whim. That's what the linen is. And then my own floss conversion with a variety of Gloriana, NPI, Averiswa. I was mostly shooting for color on this one. So I'm really pleased with how it's coming along, and I think because the linen is a little tight, I'm going to try that hoop that I got and just see if that helps. I don't want to fight with the linen and the floss combination. I like it to be a good flow, a good mix. You know, we want our stitching to be pleasant in every way. So, and then of course the last one that I have to show you that I will want to finish, or at least give a lot of attention to this next year, is the Old Scott. And as you know, I lost my father this year, and I started this in honor of him. I'm not getting the whole thing in there, am I? Let's see. So here's the top. There's so much about this sampler that I love. I love the alphabet, and I love the curlicues. And I absolutely love the way these flowers pop out. I love the castle. This little man, just his persona is just so much my dad. So that's what drew me into this sampler for sure. Of course, you know, who doesn't love all this going on, these beautiful satin stitches, and so I have played a little bit with color on this. I am definitely an experimenter, but I'm enjoying this so much. This one is being stitched on platinum, and I believe it's a 40 count. Let's see here. And I have a variety of silks that I'm stitching this with. Enjoying that very much. This is actually, yeah, it's platinum, and I'm using NPI. My paper, oh yeah, 36 count. Sorry about that. Don't mind looking at that a little longer. Oh, just yummy. Love this pink, red, purple going on. They just melt. They make my mouth water. They're so pretty. So that's what I plan to do in the sampler realm, and that will definitely be keeping me busy. I have some new acquisitions that I'd like to share with you. The first one is an antique doll quilt. This little doll quilt, I believe, is from 1870s, based on the fabrics. The poor little thing has some damage, but it doesn't matter to me. I love this fabric, so in any way I can preserve it, I will. So I bought this because it is a really nice sampler of fabrics from the 1870 period. Inside for the batting, it looks like it's carded wool, and so because this is not quilted, it's just placed together in layers, and this wool was carded and just pat, pat, pat along across the back before it was bound. It's pulled up into chunks into the corners. So this little thing needs a little bit of help, but look at some of those browns, those stripes. And this one's really special too. I'll share that story with you sometime. I love these rich colors, and if you think about 1870, and these colors are really pretty strong and vibrant, even though some of them are breaking down, it's pretty amazing. And that red binding just kind of pops it. So this came home with me because it needed to be rescued. I also received a fabulous book. Well, I received two fabulous books. They're both amazing, but this one is called Wearable Prints by Susan Green, 1760 to 1860. That's the time period of the samplers I like to stitch. It's the fabrics I love to work with for quilts. Kind of resonates with me. This book is eye candy like you can't believe. It talks about the dyeing process of a lot of these textiles, and it also shows the textiles up close and personal. So I know I've done a couple episodes with Catherine Adrian, specialty episodes, which you can look at. Here's some of those browns that are in my doll quilt. Imagine that. We've talked about fabric, and the fabrics, the dresses, the clothing, the quilts, the textiles that were being used at the same time as these samplers that I like to stitch, I think are all so interesting and really pull together a thread of information on what was going on during that time period. So I have wanted this book for quite some time, and as I looked through it, I found several fabrics that are on my shelf that have been reproduced, that are in here. So that was really exciting. I wish they were all reproduced, but I'm glad some of them have been. And then I was so fortunate to be gifted this book from a dear friend across the pond. She sent me the Whitney Antiques catalog, I Write the Needle's Praise. And it's a time period in needlework that I really strive to learn a little bit more about. It's 1630 to 1730, which is a little bit before this fabric book that I just showed you. It's sampler making when I believe girls were first being educated and sent out of the home to learn needlework skills and other necessary skills. And so it's really kind of a little time capsule in the beginning of, in the birthing of something really new that was going on. I'm curious about the lives of the stitchers. I think a lot of these stitchers might be known. Some of them probably are not. These textiles are old and they have survived centuries, and they're really truly amazing. Many things, many textiles from these time periods are gone because they just couldn't hold up to the weather or fire or rot or whatever. So of course I had to look through it immediately, and I had to look through every page, and then now I'm going back slowly reading it. But the one that just jumped out at me, of course, I loved the white work, but I loved this spot motif. See if I can get that to focus. There's something about those simple shapes surrounded by black that just they just call to me. I love the cherries and the strawberries. I would love to stitch, and this funny little bird up here. And you see this style of artwork in paintings, in casket boxes, and then of course in this band sampler. So I'm just really intrigued. And then this full coverage is just stunning. These patterns are just gorgeous. Look at the thread colors that have survived hundreds of years. These were all natural dyes. I believe, well, I should read this, but the dye would absorb into the animal fiber and just stick. It's amazing. The white work, my grandmother did a little bit of white work. The white work is so amazing, where you take a piece of linen, you cut away threads, you wrap other threads to tie them into these patterns and designs. It's just stunning. Now, I don't know, like I said, I don't know a ton about this time period. I'm very anxious to learn. I believe on page 87 is the sampler that Nicola, I believe this is Nicola's sampler. Nicola Parkman of Hands Across the Sea Samplers had a sampler in this book. Well, see if I can find it. These are glossy pages, so they are a little bit reflective. I apologize for that. I wish it was easier to show you. I don't want to spoil it for those of you who are going to get one. Some of them combined white work and the kind of motif, spot motif style of stitching. It's just truly an incredible book, and there's just eye candy galore. Many of these are reversible, which is completely intriguing to me. I would like to understand the concept and how it was done. Some of them are reversible and the designs are different on the front and the back. So they're not reversible exactly, but you have no idea, you really can't tell with the front from the back. It's just amazing. So reach out to your local needlework shop. I believe these are available through the distributor Access Commodities. If your local needlework shop does not have them, you can request it. It's definitely worth having in your collection if you are a sampler stitcher and like to do some research along those lines. I'm sorry, the one I was looking for is on page 74. Let me find it here. This one is Nicola's. I believe that was hers in the exhibition. And again, I apologize for the glare. Really don't get the full impact, but look at the vibrancy of the blue. I mean, really incredible that it's still around. All right, then I ordered some ribbon. I've been, of course, curious about other textiles from the 1800s, and this ribbon is called Petersham, and it was a ribbon used in the 1800s, around the mid 1800s, for hat making. So it was a millinery ribbon. This ribbon is so luscious. There is no selvage, so it bends and folds beautifully. It affixes to the inside of the brim of a hat, or it can be used for ribbon decor. And I have a special purpose for it in the future that I'll share with you, but oh, is it ever gorgeous. I just love it. And along with that order, I ordered, of course, because that couldn't travel by itself, some other ribbon from a millinery use, and this actually is a cable. It's open, and you can run a piece of wire in it, And so this was also used in hat making. So you run the wire in and it becomes a wired ribbon that you can make all kinds of fancy, beautiful things with for your hats. And that's also from this time period that I enjoy so much. So let's see. What else do I have for you? I have a giveaway. It's a chart that I showed you previously on this episode, and I apparently bought it twice, so I'd like to share it with you. It is from the 1840s, and it's Mary Carr. If you haven't stitched it, I don't know if I'm going to start this one or Hannah Lancaster, but I'd like to share this with you as a little holiday treat. I would love you to use the word tradition and tell me what tradition you have and what motivates your decorating and your seasonal, all the seasonal things that you do. So just use the word tradition if you're interested, and we'll do a drawing for that, and you'll hopefully receive it before Christmas. So today I've shared those things with you. I also want to share with you two other things. I had the privilege of going to Jody Trixie Tricycle's house, where we met with Laura Duet of Brenda and the Serial Starter, and Becca from Sambry Stitches, and Kelly of Modern Minimalism in the Making, and Laura's friend Carolyn. And it was a lot of fun stitching together. And at that time we were gifted some of Jody's new linen, and her company is called Cedar Creek Linens, Cedar River Linen and Design. You can check out her website. This is one of the pieces I received. It is called Red Cedar, and it's terracotta. This is a 40 count piece. And if you're interested, check out her website. She's going to start selling on December 16th, I believe. And then Becca also gifted us a chart. I do not know how to pronounce the last name, but isn't that fun? Red and green. Very, very holiday flavor. So check out Sambry Stitches if you're interested in this chart. Thank you, Becca. That was very kind of you. So today I've shown you a bit of where I've been on my needle and needlework journey, and where I've hoped to go, where I started and where I hope to go. You know, my quilt and my textile study and my love of these old fibers really drives everything. So it's my love of the textiles drove me in my quilting world. It's definitely informed my sampler stitching. It guides my decorating. When I decorate for Christmas, I bring out all the red and green quilts, and I bring out all the red and green needlework that I have, and that's really how I decorate. So you probably won't see a lot of snowmen and Santas, although they're adorable. I kind of have my own unique style. These are the threads that run through my life. So I was trying to put into words how much these textiles mean to me, because they really are an influence in so many areas of my life. They connect my life in every way. So next time, I hope to show you the progress I've made in auditioning different threads on different linens, and what projects I've decided to pick for 2023. And until then, make time for stitching. I'll see you soon.